Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And I'll be speaking in English today because that comes much faster over my lips than my French. And I was thinking of how to approach this, and I thought in the end it would be best to start gently this presentation and tell you a story that I wrote down in my book Among Digitized Manuscripts. In the postscript, there are a couple of stories, and I wrote those stories to give you an impression of what it is like to work with digitized manuscripts. And this story is called Philologica Electronica, and it begins like this: if a book is printed, there remains no flavor in it anymore, Hoxha Ismail once said. This Turkish librarian of the mid-20th century is described by Helmut Ritter as surrounded by flocks of cats, which he loved tenderly. They would be sitting on his lap, his shoulders, his arms, on the heaps of manuscripts around him. Hoxha Ismail understood the intrinsic value of moving about manuscript folios between your hands. Helmut Ritter, was effectively exiled from Germany for 20 years and found new friends in the hundreds, yes, thousands of manuscripts that he met in the libraries of Istanbul. The struggle between man and books, as Kraszkowski puts it, was easily won by the books in the case of Ritter. His series of 16 articles, all entitled Philologica, are a testament to the riches he found in this newfound friends. Then there is Franz Rosenthal's series of Franz Rosenthal's series of 16 articles, all entitled From Arabic Books and Manuscripts, which is based on the riches he found in Istanbul. And in the years that Henri Corbin was among Istanbul's manuscripts, he collected enough materials for about 16 editions, published throughout the rest of his life. Now, many other scholars passed through Istanbul to taste some of that flavor. I was determined to follow in their footsteps, and in 2011, I settled for 2 months to work day in, day out at the Suleymaniye Library, where most manuscripts are now centralized. The director gave me permission to work until Nisf al-Layl, which I asked him to repeat 2 more times because never had I encountered a special collections library open until midnight. A daily routine settled in, walking down Pera, over the Galata Bridge with its fissures, and then an immediate right turn, winding up to the Suleymaniye Mosque, with next to it the library. For lunch, going out for a grilled sandwich, a toast, and then back to work. When my eyes were too tired, I would go back home by the same route. It was everything I had hoped for, except that my hands did not grace the old paper and vellum of manuscripts, but merely the grubby keys of a keyboard attached to a computer. In the Suleymaniye Library, already in 2011, I spent my working hours looking at a computer screen, figuring out what the best search queries were to get something meaningful out of the digital catalog that was written in a hopelessly unsystematic Turkic transliteration system, while the librarians took another of their many naps. Manuscripts were not to be shown to visitors, only the computer terminals. Now, despite the general awfulness of that, manuscripts became just one click away to instantly appear, and surely that's a good thing, even if it kills Lady Serendipity, who smiled so generously on Corbin one day. I focused on late 15th century Ottoman intellectuals, a group of people who remain obscure, but whom I gotten to know from studying with Ihsan Fazlioglu, who had been roaming this library for decades. Dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds of manuscripts whizzed by. Hoxhazade's commentary on Al-Ghazali's Tahafut, or his debate with Mullah Zayrak at the court of Mehmed II, a discussion on whether direction is a real absolute thing or only relative, and the Khidr Bey's didactic poem Al-Qasida An-Nuniyya, and the commentary on it by a star student Khayali, and on and on and on. In my off hours, I went to places where these people either used to be or where their memory lives on. Makhil Kil, architectural historian of the region, took me to, for example, Molla Zayrak Jami and the Hagia Sophia Mosque. And he kept talking and walking until my ears got tired and my feet hurt. The intellectual epicenter for the folks I was interested in was Fatih Mosque with its 8 madrasas. Those 8 buildings are still there, but closed to visitors and overgrown with weed. Once I convinced a doorman to let me in, and we were chased down 2 madrasas by a ferocious-looking guard dog. As the city had evolved for a good 500 years, I found that I best connected with my new friends through their digitized handwritings. Only one time did I insist to see and handle a physical manuscript. Literally, as they were getting it out, a phone was given over to me with the whisper that it was Professor Fuad Seskin, the seemingly immortal scholar who had from his younger years, right here in this library, built a career that propelled him to head a research institute in Frankfurt and a museum in Istanbul. He was at this museum and he needed me there this very instant. I obliged, and never did I see the manuscript I was hoping to hold. And since those years, it's 10 years ago now, I have held many manuscripts in my hand. I've sat down in many different libraries to look at these precious artifacts. But more and more so, I have found myself to be in a situation like this. And I suspect that many of you will recognize this. You're actually sitting at your desk and you're among digitized manuscripts. So how is this so? Well, here's a helpful quote by McGann. He says, in the coming decades, the entirety of our cultural heritage will be transformed and re-edited in digital forms. So he says, he actually says, will be, right? It's a very forceful statement in a way. Optimistic also, but also very decided in a way. It is a direction that we have already taken, that we sort of find ourselves in, and what do we make of it? And so in the last years of the 2010 decade, I started a weblog, which I called The Digital Orientalist. And on this weblog, I would write about digitized manuscripts. So, for example, this post comparing digital materials from Berlin, Munich, and Leipzig. So it would have an introductory overview of the collection, some snippets of the photos that were in that collection, and some other remarks, just exactly what are we looking at when we're looking at digitized manuscripts. And over the years, this grew larger, and I had called it The Digital Orientalist because I wanted to explore that seeming paradox of digital, which stands for modern computational approaches, and the Orientalist, which is this word describing these fields in the humanities that study the pre-modern history of cultures and civilizations, basically right east of the Bosphorus, we could say, and all of that stands for a very sort of traditional or historical approach. But more and more, I became convinced that the two really go together. And so 5 years later, in 2020, now the Digital Orientalist is actually an entire team of people spread all over the world. And I'm looking at you to step up and become the first editor from France. Would be really great. We're covering all kinds of topics. Islamic studies is still the main focus, perhaps, but there are all kinds of other fields represented. Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, Christianity, Hebrew Bible, ancient Near East, all these different subjects come together on this in this online magazine. And why? Because we're all trying to figure out, how does this work? How do we do our normal work, but in this new environment? And we, this team, I myself included, we're all convinced that this starts with the individual, with the humanities scholar, him or herself. There are so many things that you can do yourself that you don't need a team for example. I've sort of condensed my findings into this book, Among Digitized Manuscripts. It's available in open access. Somebody already posted the link. Thank you in the chat. Just last week, I won this prize for the book, so I'm very proud of that, and I just wanted to mention that it's by the Royal Society for Librarians and Archivists in the Netherlands. Much of what I'm saying is I expand on a lot in the book, and the book really is about what you as an individual scholar can do when you're faced with photo material, digital photos of manuscripts, and how do you get it from photos into something meaningful, into a result, whether it be an edition or codicological explorations, could be anything. So there are things to keep in mind. If there's anything you should be taking away from this talk, it's 3 key points, okay? And number 1 is to get out of Microsoft Word. So you see the Microsoft Word at the top there with a big red cross through it. It's to encourage you to think outside of the possibility of Microsoft Word. I see it over and over again that we do all of our work from the very first note-taking and bibliography making down to the very paper writing and critical editing, all inside of Word, whereas there are all these other things that can do such a better job at each of these things. So if you start to unpack it, and if you think of like, okay, I need to store files, I need to read files, I need to make notes, then I need to write, and I should be thinking of a backup solution, then you already are untangling things. And then you can, what I've put up here, the icons and the names of the software programs here are just suggestions, and they stand for an entire category of pieces of software that are ready for you to use. And so even for the very conventional way of working, so to say, there's much to be gained by becoming more efficient, proficient with working on a computer. Now, a second aspect is that if you're working with digitized manuscripts, then you have every right to exploit them from the point of view of them being digital. If it's data, then you can apply, I would say, another layer, another workflow next to that first workflow that I just showed. You can put this workflow where we start at the top left with data collection. And then from data collection, we move to data cleaning. And cleaning can be done either manually or can be automated with the top 2 choices there. Once we have a cleaned data set, then we can do data analysis. And there are all these packages, they're just ready for you to use. From these analyses, of course, come visualizations, and then we're already sort of in the publishing state, so we can think of data management. How do we keep this alive for a next generation of scholars? Again, the things that I put up here are mere possibilities, but they are all kinds of things that are free or nearly free to use, and I would consider most of them to be quite low-hanging fruit when it comes to learning technology. One is more difficult than the other, but you don't have to learn everything all at once. You pick the thing that you need, actually. And in fact, it becomes a skill to learn, like, what piece of technology or method do I need to achieve my goal. That's a much better way than to only become very proficient at a hammer and try to see every problem as a nail. Now, lastly, I want to point out to always keep this in mind, right? Cultural heritage can never be fully put into a digital form. The humanities research remains a very human endeavor, and we should be in the driver's seat, and we should not let black boxes of computers tell us what to do. And in fact, I think it is rather awkward to rely on you say proprietary software or algorithms that you don't fully understand, because what's the falsifiability in there? How can we actually use results from it? The cultural heritage that we are used to work with presents such a messy reality. It's such a data set that has so many odds and ends that there is erudition is going nowhere, basically. So these are the three main points. There's more than Microsoft Word. Each digital method has its purpose, and erudition still beats computation. You're in the driver's seat, and you should be really in command of what you're doing. Now, with being in command of what you're doing, I want to introduce to you my view on sort of the application of digital methods, which we sometimes call digital humanities, or abbreviated to DH. So a lot of people think of DH as a separate field, right? Oh, it's like people who are in DH and they go to conferences and write in journals specifically for DH. That's their thing. And then it becomes this opposition with sort of what classical humanities or normal humanities, I don't know. I actually think that we should be thinking of a spectrum in which we are all are, and we have a choice of where we want to land. And this spectrum I developed into 6 archetypes to help us understand the spectrum. So let's go over these archetypes to explain what I have in mind. On the far right, we have what I would call the believer. And the believer is someone who is actually in DH, okay? That's how I would see it. This person is more interested in developing new technology, like new ways of doing handwriting recognition, than applying it to specific humanities research problem. Just on the left of that, we have the sour one. And the sour one is also someone who is very knowledgeable about digital methods, but who has been much more attached to his field of origin, so to say, and has tried to apply these digital methods to actual questions, outstanding questions in the field. But a lot of colleagues have been very wary of the results based on digital computational methods, and have sort of held off on it and been very reluctant in accepting it. And the sour one has tried his best to explain why this is so important to use digital methods, but he or she just came too early, right? And this was especially true like 10 years ago. It's a much better time now. But because of this negativity, they've become very sour about this, okay? Next to that is the spider. Usually, typically, these are full professors, and they have this ability to attract grants. It's a very good ability, and they use that to hire people who then do all kinds of interesting digital things. So these full professors themselves, they don't write software, they don't write programming, but they have reading knowledge, understanding of technologies and how it can be applied. But already you see that their mindset is much more shaped and trained by humanities research questions and like what are interesting questions, outstanding questions in the field. And So the spider is basically the leader of a group, right, of a research group. A smaller version of that is the blind and the lame. So in this case, it is usually a associate professor or assistant professor who wants to jump on the DH bandwagon, but is lame. It cannot, he or she is not able to produce these methods themselves. So they hire a student or an engineer, and together they're trying to figure out how to get to meaningful results. But usually the professor doesn't have enough knowledge of what is possible with technology, and the technician, so to say, the programmer, doesn't have enough knowledge of the field to understand what exactly the research question is. And this model almost invariably fails, and I've seen it fail a couple of times already. It is not the right way to spend our money. I would much rather see even this model be more condensed into one person, and that's the centaur. This is my ideal archetype, which I hope you will all become. You have a head of a human, a humanistic head with which you think in terms of research questions and strategies that are common to our field. But your feet are digital, and you're able to move freely through all the digitized archival materials or textual corpora that are available, and use all kinds of tools to mold and twist and change your material in the shape that you want it. A lot of individual freedom experienced here. Lastly, we shouldn't be forgetful of the obstinate ostrich, the person who sticks his head in the sand and holds a Molotov cocktail in its claw to throw at you if you talk about DH too much, usually more at the top of university administrations, like senior professors who really are, they're just a generation behind in terms of adapting digital methods, and find it very hard indeed to see the use of it. Find it sort of almost offensive, right, to be using it for research questions. So this brings us to a normal use of our resources. We all know that we can search on Gallica and browse through its holdings, and then look through the catalog to find what we need, and then think like, okay, I can use this perhaps. And so you, even within Gallica, you can click it open, and there you go. You can start reading it already. There it's loading. And so you read the manuscript. But interestingly enough, this is something that we're all well aware of. But when it's time to write a publication and cite our sources, we end up with this, a paper that cites the manuscript, but does not cite or mention that it's using the digitized manuscript. And I picked this article really not to detract from its author. It's a very interesting paper, but the paper itself is exactly about using digitized manuscripts. That's its stated purpose. And even this paper falls into this falsehood of thinking of digitized manuscript as a neutral window onto the actual artifact. And I think this is not true. Digitized manuscript, sure, is a representation of the actual artifact, but it is an editorial practice. Take a look at this. I collected 20 samples from 20 different libraries all around the world, and I did my best to find manuscripts that are about the same size, have the same line number, to get you kalas that are approximately the same size in real life. And when you start to compare them, you see huge variety in the, well, the most obvious difference here is resolution, is just sort of the amount of information that is stored within such a square block. And so digitization is an editorial practice. So we can use digital surrogates, but we ought to be aware of the transformations that have been applied to it from the actual artifact to the digitized surrogate. How do we do this? And mind you, it happens even on the level of a single manuscript. I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but it's the same UCAL from the very same manuscript, same page, right? It's the same UCAL, but the bottom left is my own photograph. Okay, so that's different from another photograph. But the other three, top left, top right, bottom right, are from the very same click of a photographer. Once he clicked, these three different versions, they're different in resolution and even different in color saturation. These three versions rolled out, and it's a testament that things happen between the click of a photographer and us seeing it on a screen. So that means that we need a vocabulary to talk about digital materiality of these surrogates. So I go into much more depth in the book, so I'll keep it brief here. You can look at the size of the collection, online availability, ability to download, the portal, and the viewer. And these 5 aspects say something about the context in which you find a digitized manuscript. The portal and the viewer is basically just the website, right? We saw Gallica, the portal, and then at the very last, we saw the viewer that Gallica has. And Gallica actually has one of the very best viewers around. But you can also find yourself in a much more, poor or simple situation. And it's up to you to decide whether you can make do with that. The ability to download is, I think, very important, because it is just, it's indispensable to hold the digital surrogate yourself, because only then can you fully do with it what you want. And like I said, there's so much low-hanging fruit. There's so many things that you can do. So why don't we, right? I'll give an example of the ability to download in a second. Then there are other things that are really related to the one photograph, and that's indication of page numbers. Huge problem, still is. Image resolution, which we already saw, it varies greatly. Color balance, the lighting, and how the image is cut. I'll give you some examples to understand what I'm trying to say here. So the ability to download, it's nice to download an image, but first I was able to download the image on the right, and then a couple of years later, I saw someone else had acquired the same manuscript, and I looked at it, and by then the Turkish authorities had placed this huge digital watermark on top of it. And now their watermark is not even the worst, but still, why place a watermark on a digital surrogate? It is just so sad to see that we are sort of being hampered in our reading abilities. Because a lot of these things, it's not about the 99% that is legible, because that's easy anyway. It's about the 1% that is already difficult to read, in which your capacities as an editor are really are really called upon and in which you can really show yourself to be an excellent editor. It's that 1% that you need to get right and that you need to sort of make arguments for why you have it right. And you don't want a stupid digital watermark to interfere with that, of course. So page number issue, which I mentioned, is this. So at the top right, you see number 35 digitally embossed onto the image. And it means that it's like the 35th JPEG of the series of photos of that manuscript. But it actually is folio 11A. We see that. We see that in this photograph very clearly. So what use is this information of number 35 other than to throw sand in my eyes? And we all know that there are many folios which are unnumbered. For example, sometimes only the decades are numbered, 10, 20, 30. So then you would have to go through a lot of trouble to count back and forth which photograph actually belongs to which folio. And in fact, what we're seeing here also points to a problem of perception. Right now, digitized manuscripts really are seen as manuscripts. That is, they are thought to be used only as, basically you take a manuscript and you read it cover to cover. But what if I have a collection of 10,000 manuscripts and I only take from each manuscript the 20th page, for example, as a kind of a comparison across these 20,000 manuscripts? What I would like is to have direct feedback as to which manuscript does this photo belong to. So it doesn't happen right now. If you download photos, then invariably it will have a weird file name that you need to rename yourself in order to remind yourself where it came from, what it belongs to actually. Very important, because very easily you lose track of where you get your stuff from. We can only hope that this issue will be solved in the future. For my part, I'm talking a lot to librarians and try to convince them of this. Color balance. So here, example of a very bluish photo. Next to blue, green is also a big problem for manuscripts. The cut of the photo, here's a good example. We can fully see the folio, and even all the way around it, we see the edge of the manuscript, and we know that we have everything we see. Lighting actually may not be that good, but all right. Here's a bad cut of a photo. The photo was taken and then only the text block was cut out and saved. And so maybe we're missing something in the margins. It is frustrating not to see the entire codex because we don't know exactly now what's going on. This is an example of a very well-lit manuscript surrogate. This photo is very well lit. It's very even, very bright. It's very unfortunate to see that digital watermark at the top, which is pretty, makes it pretty hard to read what's going on there. This is a very badly lit photo. And you can clearly see that the light source was coming from the right. There was a light source there which cast light, which created this hill of a white, of oversaturation, and then this valley of darkness onto the left. In our field of Islamic studies, this is not unusual. Not everyone makes photographs as good as the BNF or the Stabi in Berlin. There are plenty of repositories that try to make do with these kinds of photos. So it becomes a real tough decision whether to use this or not. Now, whether you're using it or not, or rather, if you're using it, then I would suggest that it is only fair to make mention of this in your edition or in your paper, and to say something about let's call it the digital materiality. And here's just, it can be very elaborate, can be a couple of pages where you really describe the whole repository of the library and sort of the history of its digitization. Oh, they started in the 20,000s and in the 2000s, and then they moved to a better technology in the 2010s, something like that. Can also just be 2 sentences like this. It gives me a good impression of what kind of photos you were using. And that gives me an impression of how reliable your edition is, right? Or if I find something odd about your edition, whether I should investigate if it's the digital surrogates that interfered with this. Let's shift gears here a little bit. We talked about digitized manuscripts as manuscripts. And so we basically touched on that third point, that erudition still trumps computation, right? There's a lot for us still to evaluate when we come to digitized manuscripts. But we can also look at digitized manuscripts as digitized, as data. And then we can do all kinds of things with it. I'm just going to give 2 examples. There are a couple more examples in the book, all worked out, and all the resources are available as well. Here is one thing. So here we see this photo of a manuscript which has in the margin on the right, it has these 3 symbols in red. And this is from a text that I actually studied. It's a philosophical text. And these symbols, the philosopher says, like, oh, this is like the summary of my thinking. So I started to collect digital photos of different manuscripts of this text to attempt to compare these symbols. And what you can do, if you load them on an iPad, you can zoom in, of course. And if you're in a program in which you can draw, and specifically I'm drawing here vector shapes, and vector shapes are different from pixels, where the underlying photo is pixel based, right? It's just little blocks with different colors. But here we're just defining points and curves. And once we have that, we can extract it. Also notice I'm not drawing the entire symbol. I can do it piece by piece, because I know that I can put these different vector shapes together in whatever way I see fit. And so once only I'm done here, and this was done in a Vectornator, by the way, Vectornator on the iPad. Once I was done with this, then I took it to Adobe Illustrator, and Illustrator is a paid piece of software, but a lot of universities will sponsor it. Then I created something like this. So now I drew out these glyphs, these symbols from 5 manuscripts, really, and then the edition of Henri Corbin. And now I have so much flexibility to do with them as I please. For example, I can compare all the left symbols. At the top row is all the left symbols. And the middle symbols are in the middle row, and the right symbols are in the bottom row. And I gave colors to parts of the symbols that are equal to immediately visually assess which versions of the symbols have the same parts, basically. And then from this, you can make some kind of eclectic edition of the symbols, like what I believe to be the true original symbols. And I can make them as big or as small as I want, because vector shapes can be zoomed in, can be expanded as much as you like, and they always remain sharp. So it makes for a very nice way of analyzing, but also for presenting them. So here's another example. What if I have 300 photos, all the photos of an entire manuscript, right? It's like 150 folios, 300 photographs. I can look at them myself like this, I can flip through them. but I can also let a computer flip through them. And that I can do, of course, much quicker than I can do. And then I can say to the computer, only attach the ink and stack the ink on top of each other to create this sort of X-ray, a sort of ink X-ray of the entire manuscript. So we've condensed the entire manuscript into this one image, and instantly it becomes clear how big the text blocks are, how many lines of text there is throughout the manuscript. And I can use this information for all kinds of purposes. For example, now I could automatically analyze the entire manuscript again, but only focus on the margins, because I know where the text block is, so I can just sort of delete that and focus only on the margins, as an example. So it's an example of really being in control and sort of having mastery over your source material. And the source material is increasingly becoming digital, so should our methods be, right? Okay. I hear some of you think, I just want to work with the text. It's nice that you gave these graphical examples, but I look at manuscripts or archival records only for the textual content. That's fine. So then we move more towards that first key takeaway of expanding beyond Microsoft Word, of still becoming proficient enough to really increase your productivity. And here are some, let's put it differently. It's good at this point, really, to think about, what do I want? What is my desired end result? And all too quickly do we think in a printed publication, but it needn't be the only outcome, or it might just be sort of a secondary outcome where you actually think like, well, I want an edition that, sure, I want to publish as a printed publication, but I also want to keep using it in the future to do statistical analysis on. So there are different things that you can do. Here's one thing. If you just need a small critical edition solely for print purposes, like you pinky swear, I'm only going to publish this in a journal or a book, and there's nothing unusual about it, I think you would be perfectly fine to use something like Mellel or the classical text editor. These are pieces of software that are just a bit more powerful than Word. For example, Mellel looks a lot like Word, but it has the ability to have multiple footnote streams, for example. Like you can number one footnote stream with Roman numerals and the other with Arabic numerals. Mellel has the ability instantly to overline, which is kind of what medieval Arabic texts do. So it would be much nicer to do that too. These kinds of things you can do quite easily. So what if you're working with a very large text? I mean, very large, right? And you basically already have it. Already someone went through the trouble to transcribe it, to type it out. Right, I'm thinking about a Maktaba Ashamila that the OpenITI and the Kitab project are using. Then their approach, which they call Markdown with capital A, capital R, is pretty good. It's a very simple way of marking things throughout the text that are of interest to you. And you would need a code editor. This might be a bit scary, perhaps at first, might feel like you're operating a spaceship, but you will come to understand that these programs, these code editors like Visual Studio Code, Sublime Text, or OpenITI's favorite is Edipad Pro. They're very useful for these kinds of things, because try to open a text file with like 200,000 words in Microsoft Word, it's not going to like it. But a program like Visual Studio Code or Editpad Pro, no problem. And I mention here that since the document will be very long, and so you will only go over it once, you have to think about in advance, like, what do I want to tag? And then you can go through it. All right. This would be only a preparatory stage for some further data analysis. Then you want to know, what did I tag exactly? Where are those tags? So perhaps you have a large set of separate writings, like a diary or collection of letters. Then a VRE, a virtual research environment, will be very useful to you. There are a couple of choices, and a lot of them are in various stages of depreciation, actually. So buyer beware. But Scripto would be one that I would recommend. Quite easy to get into, and still has a lot of advanced features to use in the future. What's easy about these kinds of solutions is also that you're able to sort of outsource the work, right? You can now assign different text to different people. If you work intensively with a stable text, let's say the Hebrew Bible or the Quran, and your analysis is not so much concerned with variance across manuscripts, but more about the structure and content of the text, then it will be beneficial to use a standoff annotation. And as one example, I give TextFabric, which is a text analysis package written in Python, a programming language, which perhaps sounds all very difficult, but it already comes with an interface, with a quite easy to use graphical interface. And I've applied the Quran to TextFabric so that we were able to do structural analysis on the Quran. If you wish to critically edit a text with unusual features or multiple manuscript witnesses, and especially if you want to publish a printed publication, but you also want to keep open the option that you will do computational analysis or add this text to a larger corpus of texts, then it would be interesting to look at writing up to transcribe the entire text in an XML format, of which TEI is the most well-known standard in the humanities, be it that it knows its difficulties when applied to a right-to-left script, such as Arabic. But as you can see, all of these things are only one solution to one specific problem. None of these solve the different cases as well as they do. And on an even more meta level, it is my experience, it's my thinking that you might want a critical digital edition, but in the end, it is the everlasting problem of wanting 3, but only being able to get 2 out of 3. So maybe you get the edition and the critical part very well, but then it's probably not very digital. Like when you make it in MLL, then it is much harder to do computational analysis on it. But if you go fully for a digital edition, or rather say digital and critical, for example, in TextFabric with a standoff annotation, then it's not human readable anymore. Then you can only use it for computational analysis, so to say. So these are some of the things that I wanted to give to you. There's more than Microsoft Word. Each digital method has its purpose, and erudition still beats computation. and looming over all three of them is the fact that the road we're already on is towards more digitization, and there are a fantastic number of packages, methods, pieces of software in various stages of difficulty that are just ready for you to use. And I don't want to recommend one specific piece of software over the other. I'd rather want you to understand the principles of working in a digital workflow, in a digital environment, and achieving mastery in this way, so that you can keep choosing the best solution as it is available. That's it for now. Maybe there are some questions that I might have some answer to, and I thank you for your time, of course.